That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about National Champions, the seventh film directed by Ric Roman Waugh, which STX Films is releasing December 10th, 2021.
The director?
Ric Roman Waugh is a stuntman turned film director. We reviewed his last film, Greenland.
Is that with the...
Gerard Butler.
Oh, yes.
About the End of the World.
Yes.
I believe there's a sequel that's currently underway. He also directed Angel Has Fallen, Shot Caller, I recommend. Previous to this film, I think his best work was a 2013 movie called Snitch, starring Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Susan Sarandon.
We saw the trailer for National Champions while we were at the theater watching True to the Game 3. And I thought this film looked really interesting.
It's written by Adam Mervis, who appears as a bartender in the film. Previously, he wrote 21 Bridges, which is a recommendable movie starring Chadwick Boseman. And his last movie he wrote was The Last Days of Capitalism, which oddly enough kind of feels like a better title for this film. But
So, to be clear, we know nothing about sports.
Hot Hike, that's about...
Literally nothing.
Specifically football, I know very
And
little.
certainly not college sports. So I'm sure we're going to get comments about that. But the basic story revolves around an NCAA football game.
A national title for college football. What I understand from this film is a very important game.
Like the Super Bowl of college football, I guess? Maybe? I don't know. All right. I'm just dreading all the comments. Okay, so it revolves around this weekend, like 72 hours before the game is supposed to happen. And there's a player for one of the teams, the star quarterback of the Missouri team.
The Missouri Wolves, he's the first pick. He's touted as the best quarterback.
His name is LeMarcus. Mm-hmm. So we see him right away in his hotel suite because they're in New Orleans, like they're out of state to play this game, with his best friend and teammate, Emmett. Mm-hmm. LeMarcus is played by...
Stephan James from If Beale Street Could Talk, and he played Jesse Owens in Race. And Emmett is played by Alexander Ludwig. Who you know from Bad Boys Forever.
That's right.
I recognize him most from a Mark Wahlberg film called Lone Survivor.
All right. So right away... LeMarcus has a plan. First he tweets he's going to boycott the game, but the reason he's doing that and ultimately gives a press conference about it is...
He doesn't interview, he doesn't give a press conference.
He doesn't do it, you're right. A video is released of him explaining why he's boycotting, and the reason is, he says that the NCAA makes billions and billions and billions of dollars, and they only use a portion of that money to pay for the educations of all these college athletes, when really they should be unionized and given like reasonable salaries, and probably the most important thing is healthcare, because many of these athletes, specifically football players, sustain injuries that have lifelong consequences, and the vast majority of these players will never go pro, and will have to deal with the repercussions of their injuries.
Well, and those years they wasted on it don't help them further them in any other employment capacity.
Exactly. So the bulk of the film is...
He wants them to be considered employees and not student athletes.
Students. So the bulk of the film is the sort of... it becomes a thing. Like several other players support him along with professional athletes. So... the NCAA has no choice but to react. Mm-hmm. And that reaction takes the form of two characters who are they're almost like the Olivia Pope.
Sure. They're doing damage control for the
NCAA, trying to spin it and figure out how, because they keep saying this game this weekend will generate $500 million alone. So they don't want to jeopardize that. Ultimately, LeMarcus chooses to not play, but of course the game goes on. The end.
Yeah.
Well, there's no resolve. They don't... It just sort of goes through the motions of... So the people who are trying to spin this are played by...
Jeffrey Donovan and Uzo Aduba.
And Uzo in particular, she has center stage in that regard, and she plays a lawyer
named Katherine Poe.
And she's just trying to explain to him, like, you're not going to achieve what you think you're going to achieve. Not only that, we have dirt on you, and we are not afraid to release this dirt if you don't do what we ask you to do. The dirt they have, there are two things. One, they get they somehow secure his personal medical records. These were not medical records that he didn't visit a doctor under the school. He went to a private doctor, and they still got those records. And it shows that like one of his knees has no cartilage, but like he was born that way. So they're trying to imply, and they do leak it to the media, that LeMarcus is only doing this because he knows once he gets drafted, because he's the number one person who will get picked, and we're told that he will get like $35 million. But once the NFL does his exam and they see that he has no cartilage in his knee, they're saying that they wouldn't draft him. So this is why he's doing all this, to try to have a backup plan. But he argues, like, what team would not choose the number one pick? And I haven't had cartilage this entire time I've been playing, so I still have another good 8 to 10 years. The other thing they have on him is apparently he was involved in like an altercation at a bar, which resulted in someone being injured, not killed, but injured. And the NCAA paid off this person so that they could kind of bury it. And we can get into that because I didn't understand how that was more damaging to LeMarcus, because to me it seems like that's more damaging towards the NCAA.
Right. And that's how he tries to play it back on them, because a large component of this film is also J.K. Simmons playing Coach Lazor.
Which I feel like I didn't even mention him because I don't really understand what he has to do with anything. Because they make it seem like he's in control of these players, which I guess as a coach you do have a lot of visibility with them, but ultimately, J.K. Simmons' character can't do anything. He can't unionize players. He can't pay them a salary.
No, but he's brought up as an example for LeMarcus's boycott about the exorbitant amount of money that, say, for instance, the coach makes in his 3 extravagant homes.
His $5 million salary and his bonuses and his vacation homes.
And also is kind of teasing at that faux fatherhood representation a coach has for his players. And the film does kind of get into some more compelling territory by offering up how this sets up kind of a modern day slavery where black bodies are kind of bruised and broken for the needs of this game and only to be left abandoned.
Well, let's get into that because a lot of time is spent with J.K. Simmons' character, the coach, and sort of like his life is falling apart. His wife, played by Kristin Chenoweth, is leaving him, which we can get into. And then he gives... So the best part of this movie is the characterization of LeMarcus and the actor playing him again.
Stephan James.
He does a tremendous job.
Yeah, he's really good.
Because there were moments when I was like, yeah, I'll boycott too.
Yeah, this is wrong.
Yeah, this is wrong. He's very inspiring. But I feel like there was nothing to match that because it's like David against Goliath. But Goliath is really not present. It's like it's represented by the coach and Uzo's character. And then there's a scene where, because the commission or whatever is telling the coach, like, you need to get out here and make sure the rest of your players don't boycott. So he organizes them all in a conference room and gives this speech that I thought was so uninspiring. The first half of it is just him talking about his life. And my note was like, who cares about that character? Who cares about the coach? This is not about the coach. It's about the NCAA and these athletes. Like, what does the coach have to do with anything?
But I think that's where the film ultimately is lacking. It's really balancing a lot of subjects in this kind of microcosm, if you will, but all of the relationships don't quite make sense, including arguably that between LeMarcus and Emmett. Like, I could have used a little more finessing about that, but it's really juggling so many moving parts that I guess I can find that forgivable. But I think if Coach Lazor had been allowed to be displayed as this kind of father figure to these young men, you could see how that might be inspiring to them. But without that context, us just watching it is like...
Well, then getting to LeMarcus and Emmett, they're very close, and they seem to have this allegiance to one another. And we find out that part of the dirt involving this fight LeMarcus was charged with is that there's footage of Emmett, or witnesses saying that Emmett is the one who beat up. There's also... There's also this plot point about his brother, LeMarcus's brother.
Reggie.
And I didn't understand why that was important because Reggie's dead.
which is a reveal.
Like, we find out he committed suicide, so I don't understand what...
Well, because he took the fall, because if his brother had been charged, he would have been,
He lost his career.
Yes, but LeMarcus and his reputation, the NCAA was, because it was him, would put forth the money
that makes sense.
To bury it.
Okay, that makes sense. So the reason they kept talking about his brother is because they know the brother took the fall for LeMarcus. And then LeMarcus gives this like sort of impassioned speech about how his brother died. And
there are just some kind of clunky ways that needed to be a lot more elegantly finessed, if you will, including a bit about cell phones with Kristin Chenoweth having J.K. Simmons' personal and business cell phone on the night that she leaves him after this conference where he gives a speech. And she's also having an affair with Timothy Olyphant, who's playing this professor who, unbeknownst to us till late in the game, has been helping LeMarcus as well.
Okay, so I jumped ahead a little bit because Emmett, part of the dirt is that Emmett was the one also involved in the fight, and LeMarcus doesn't want to like get his friend in trouble. Mm-hmm. And I felt like, yes, we're told that they're best friends, but this allegiance they have, it just seems, I mean, it's very tight. I don't think that's necessarily a problem. I just feel like there's a lot happening. So then transitioning to Kristin Chenoweth's character, oh my God, I'm trying to be nice today. But I mean, you said she looked like a melted Barbie, but I think that's important because so then like the final showdown with like everyone in the room, like LeMarcus, Uzo, the coach, and they're saying like, we're gonna do this if you don't do this, and then they're telling him, we got all this dirt on you, bam. And LeMarcus is like, oh, really? Well, I got Coach's cell phone, and we know this, this, and this. And what LeMarcus knows, I guess we're supposed to understand that, or LeMarcus is implying that Timothy Olyphant, who's a professor at their school, he is passing these athletes knowing damn well they didn't earn those grades. And the reason he's doing that is because Coach is letting him have sex with his wife. Which I didn't... Okay, if that's going to be the story, I feel like the wife needs to be like a 10. I mean, because Timothy Olyphant is a very handsome man. And then it's like, so your little prize is Kristin Chenoweth?
I don't know that it...
Is that what he was implying?
I don't know that it doesn't matter what this woman looks like. Really, it's if we believe that they have a connection. Because we see so little of these two together, and then she does this thing with both her husband and Timothy Olyphant. It's like, I'm using your phone to look up stuff. Why? Why are you doing that?
Sure, but am I correct? Like that LeMarcus is implying that the coach is using his wife to sort of barter grades from the professor.
I think that's part of it, but also
that's why.
Also in that phone are records of what the coach's hand and others in burying that story of the bar fight.
I feel like then the coach's wife should have been like Sofia Vergara or somebody. I'm just saying. Okay. That threw me off a lot.
It's distracting, but I think it wouldn't have been again if they had been characterized as people that actually have a passionate connection. Because how they dissolve is also so flimsy. They're on their way to Rome. As this stuff with LeMarcus is going down, Kristin Chenoweth, whose name is Bailey Lazor, says, I'm going off to Rome, and he knows who she's going with. And then she makes some off-the-cuff comment about these spoiled kids, and Timothy Olyphant comes out of the bathroom and says, well, I'm helping LeMarcus. And she says, get out of here. Really? It's that flimsy? It's those things that kind of reveal the weaknesses about it. And I referenced Ric Roman Waugh's Snitch, which I think is a really good film with The Rock, except there are elements of that film too where it's like, oh, this is like the Susan Sarandon character in that one, where the dialogue and the casting seems and I think as much as I like Uzo Aduba and like seeing her in something outside of Orange is the New Black, I don't know that she fits, and it's not really her fault. It's also what the screenplay is demanding of her.
I agree. I think that character should have been played sort of like more cold and...
She should have been like Jodie Foster in Inside Man.
Yes.
And part of her, one of her monologues does bring up there are two important points from her monologues. One is that she can relate to LeMarcus in that she was a student athlete and only got out of the Red Hook projects because she had a scholarship in track, blah, blah, blah. But what we needed to have seen is that maybe that was a lie, because it's just too convenient that, of course, it sets up this thing where she's like a race traitor almost, which I don't really like. And I much rather would have had that be fashioned as she's saying whatever she needs to say to get him to step down.
To me, more importantly, I think there was a very important point to what she was saying that I think just got glossed over, which is LeMarcus is concerned about football players. And again, I don't know anything about sports, so I could be totally wrong, but I understand the NCAA is an umbrella for all collegiate sports. So Uzo's character says, like, you're only worried about men's football and basketball, she says. But what about all of the other sports? And I thought, like, yeah, I wish that because, the David versus Goliath thing, could work. But I think I would have preferred, like, this battle between, like, his ideology and then this black female character who, like you said, is, like, could relate to him, but maybe she's lying. That would have been interesting. But really, as the audience, making me feel like I don't know what's right. Because the way LeMarcus is telling it is like, well, yeah, of course, like, these guys should have compensation and they shouldn't be struggling and they should have health care. But then it's not answering, like, as a business person, I feel like I need to understand, like, the cost. Like, it almost feels like just Bernie Sanders talking about everything should be free. And it's like, yeah, that sounds great, but how do you intend to pay for this? Just because they make $30 million and they only spend $5 billion on education, it's like, the math is not that easy. And what are you proposing? And if all college sports fit under that, how much do the water polo players get versus the basketball players versus the women's, long jump people? Like,
I think the point is that it's a much greater conversation and it's more complex problems with the system that is not just sports, it is capitalism at large. And what we really need to be talking about is, that these fans don't care what's going on. And really, it's really about how we need to be treating each other as humans across the board. But,
That's right. Because the topic is so complex and no one probably would want to watch a film where they're detailing how they're going to budget all this, then I think what would have been super fascinating is this battle between the lawyer trying to spin this for the NCAA and the player causing the problem. And then also sort of the relationship that the audience and the spectators, the fans have. Because these fans don't give a shit about these players. They don't care.
I wanted it to feel a little more contained and maybe just a little smarter than it does. Well, maybe a lot smarter than it does. But like, I wanted this to be like Glengarry Glen Ross, where we're getting a peek behind the curtain of this desperation and this sordidness going on. And it skirts. One really good scene is when J.K. Simmons is giving a press conference and somebody asks him about how is this system like the modern day slave trade, and he makes a comment like, well, if we're saying this is the slave trade, I'd find being a slave, and then it kind of just like
it just drops off.
It drops off, but what it really does is kind of shine a spotlight very briefly on this relationship between these white coaches and these black athletes. And we see, how many sports movies have you seen where it's just taken for granted that this white person has any of these people's interest in mind at all. Like, it brought to mind Ivan Reitman's Draft Day with Kevin Costner, or more specifically, Blue Chips with Nick Nolte and Shaq.
Right, and I think this film is I got the sense that we're supposed to feel like the coach does care about his players. But
to a degree,
but I didn't get that. Like, I don't trust him.
Not at all, no.
So, I don't know, it just isn't as complex as I think it should be. I feel like any episode of Scandal is probably more intricately written than this.
I don't know.
It felt very basic to me. It's just a character that was played very well by this, what's his name again?
Stephan James.
He did a fantastic job with that role.
Good. And he's really good in the other films that I've seen him in as well.
But it's him. Like, if it weren't such a good portrayal, I think this would feel kind of silly. Like, this guy just gets up and says all these things and everyone's like, yeah, you're right. But then the game goes on. There really is nothing to connect us to how it affects the audience, how the other players really don't get a lot of face time with other players and how this could affect them. We get a lot of time with LeMarcus talking to them and saying how, like, basically, you're probably not going to make it, so you need a backup plan. And then the coach telling them, like, this is your chance to fulfill a dream, and that's worth something. Plus, you're getting a first-class education. It's just very basic.
Sure. I also thought it was funny that, these two, LeMarcus and Emmett, are holed up in this hotel room, and they're supposedly so hard to find. But several characters go find them, including Olyphant, including Lil Rel, who strolls into their hotel room and is like, you guys are harder to find than blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, literally everyone's saying they're so hard to find that people just find them.
Like, Lil Rel is interesting, too.
And they're in the same hotel. Everyone's in the same hotel.
Yes, because he's a coach as well, and they're not sure if Lazor is going to completely crumble with everything going on. So they offer him the chance to be the first black coach to bring his team out there for a championship national title game, which reminded me of kind of how Chris Rock was offered a presentation slot at Oscars So White in 2014. Kind of how it's just so obvious that it's a pawn move.
This review's long.
Okay, well, there's interesting things here.
Yeah, I was interested from the trailer. I think it's engaging enough.
Tim Blake Nelson, who's a closeted gay character.
I didn't fully understand that. I'm assuming, because there's a point where he's trying to bribe like a handsome waiter or bartender or something, and then the guy says like, give me 500.
He's, what do I get out of it? And he goes, a room number. And he's like, oh, what time are you done? He's like, and he goes, not my room.
But then he says like my previous marriages, and I don't know if he was referring to men or that was just a blip, whatever.
Sure, but I don't know. There are things of interest. And I also thought it was funny that Snickers is the sponsor.
Oh.
I don't know if that's just for this film, probably just for this film, but the amount of Snickers is...
Yes, because Emmett's character eats a lot of Snickers. I would give this movie 2.5 out of 5.
I think 2.5 is fine. It does have lines like, a coach and his quarterback, there's no closer bond. And then Uzo has some line where she's like, they don't understand, life is about losing, which just feel a little too obvious. But that said, some of it is very well written, some of it feels a little basic. I'm going to say 2.5 out of 5 as well, but I think that rating doesn't reflect that. It really is an engrossing watch, especially if you're not one who likes sports films.
That's true. I don't like sports, and I was still interested, and after watching it, I felt like, okay. I will say, when the film ended, I was like, oh, so that's it. Like,
well, where could it?
We accomplished nothing.
Because we never get the sense. What I wanted to say also is that Goliath is ever shaking in their boots. Really, truly. It's just somebody, sacrifice. Somebody ascends to martyrdom for the greater good, and that's what the film is about.
And you know what? Please comment if you're mad that we don't know about sports. I've started to find rude comments funny now.
Well, if they're constructive and I'll learn something.
They're not constructive, but I do think they're funny.
Okay.
Anyway, is that all?
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.